Chromanoids. 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 Chromanoids.
Okay, hello, we have here Laura Kurgan. She is an associate professor of architecture at the Graduate School of Architecture Planning and Preservation at Columbia, and she's also the director of the Center for Spatial Research. She's presenting here two different projects, and my first question would be, are you human?
Not today. Yeah. I'm getting there. I'm on my way to being back to human. Yeah.
Okay, my first question would be related to the project that you are presenting in the Archaeological Museum. First, before we are talking about this project, I would like to ask you, how is it to work inside of the Archaeological Museum and dealing precisely with this great collection, but also with this kind of display?
Well, when I first talked to Mark and Beatrice about this project, and they presented the idea in terms of the origins of humanity, and it's not the origins of humanity, but the definition of humanity and its archaeologies, and they talked about the archaeology museum. I, at the same time, was working on a project about Aleppo. Mm-hmm. And talking about to them about the difference between definitions of vandalism and barbarism in current day wars. So especially in terms of the city that I was working on, Aleppo, which is being a 5,000-year-old city that's being destroyed. And Mark said, I know there's objects in the archaeology museum that come from Aleppo. I said, well, that's what the exhibit should be about. And at the same time, Aleppo crossed all the timescales that they had proposed. It's sort of as part of the structure of the exhibit, from 2 seconds to, I can't remember the definitions, but there was one in there that we added. We added a timescale to their definition because Aleppo really defies one timescale. So we really had to do our exhibition in a place that was outside of the categories that they had set up, and also one that would address a lot of the projects at the Biennale. So our original idea was to do some kind of map which would point towards all the projects in the Biennale, which had some kind of relationship with Aleppo. But in the end, as the exhibit designers over there gave us a space, we ended up in the Archaeology Museum. And then it was hard. It got a little harder in terms of we wanted to actually display an artifact from Aleppo as part of our exhibition, and that didn't quite work out. And in the end, we have a video of one of the columns that's actually from the heart of the citadel. I haven't seen it yet, and apparently it's really gorgeous. So yeah, so.
One question would be precisely in this project of Aleppo.
Yeah.
How Aleppo is in a way challenging the discipline of architecture in a way, no? Because it's not only about an archaeological site in itself, but also like conceptions like urban damage are constantly challenged, no? Like like in the current times, no?
Well, I think Aleppo challenges a lot of things besides architecture. So I think it's challenging a global territory right now of inaction. It's challenging, it's challenging definitions of architecture because so much is being destroyed. Huge parts of this we don't even know. We actually don't know yet what's happening. What has actually been destroyed in Aleppo. It challenges also the distinction between urbanism and rural villages, because so many people actually migrated to Aleppo before the war, also from Iraq, also as a network of trade over many, many years. So it challenges so many fundamental categories of, yes, of architecture, but of a much larger conception of what we might call architecture. Physical buildings have been damaged, but much more in terms of the global networks that have been caused by the war and that brought the war to it in the first place. So,
I would like to continue with this idea of, in a way, connections between different kind of realities and also this kind of interscalarity that you are presenting in Aleppo, but also in the project that you are presenting in Galata Greek School, that it is on the brain and especially on the connectome. So could you define what the connectome is? Because I think that it is also like a kind of a definition of a human being.
Yes, that's for sure. Well, first I have to say this about the show in the Galata Museum, in the Galata School. The scale is multiple, but it goes from something like 1,000 to 1 to 8,000 to 1, and I've always wanted to do an exhibit that's larger than life. You know, architects really they fetishize the 1-to-1 scale. That's the world that they live in and that they define. So I was very excited about this. So the exhibit has neurons, which are sometimes 8,000 times real size, and the brain that's there spinning around, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe that's only 5 or 6 times real size. So the connectome is a model of the brain that's often called the networked model of the brain. So there has been a conception of the human brain, that things happen in particular places. You know, my memory is here, the motion is here, the balance is here. There's it's been defined that way for many years. But now they've made these models of the brain that show how neurons are the cells inside our brain, and they're really, really tiny. They're like thousands of meters. And then connections occur across them, which are electrical and chemical signals, and that also occurs at 1,000 subseconds. And so those trillions of connections of the way that the things, you know, our neurons communicate with each other. There's this phrase in science, is that neurons that wire together fire together, and so that they used to think that neurons would communicate contiguous to one another, but they actually jump. So they jump across parts of our brain. And that's what the connectome is. It's telling us that the brain is a networked model, not a spatial model. And it's at the forefront. You know, we don't understand the brain, not even close to understanding the brain.
Well, in a way, it was like really interesting because I was just like hearing you. The way that you describe the brain is the way that you usually describe cities, in a way, you know, and your previous work on, for example, on maps, and how could you map, in a way, a city, you know?
Right.
So if your previous work was like precisely so based in this idea of the city, and how could we describe it, why brain now?
Because the brain it's a mystery. It's still, you know, here we are, we're humans, we have brains. And our human brains are very similar to animal brains in a lot of ways. But the brain it's really a mystery, right? It's this like mass of thousands and millions of connections in your head, and nobody knows how it works. And the ones that, you know, the efforts that we take to understand how it works have to do with very functionally oriented experiments trying to cure this and that illness or this and that motion disability, etc. But the mystery of the brain remains just that, and I think will remain just that for a long time, even though people think that they'll be able to visualize the brain. They'll be able to, you know, and when we visualize things for the first time, it produces new understandings of things, right? So when Kayal drew from his memory those first incredibly detailed neurons in, I don't remember which year, they were hand drawings. He was a painter. And then he looked at these things under a microscope and then drew them from his memory. Those neurons that he drew are very similar to the ones that we're projecting around in the space. But your question, about the relationship between the brain and the city.
Yeah.
I resist that. I resist that. That's the one-to-one architecture thing. That the brain is a metaphor of space. I think we learn a lot about the brain. But what I'm more excited about right now is that they've discovered these things called, that in the 70s, they discovered these things called place cells in the brain. So when you're in a space, you remember that space by its imprint in a place cell in your brain. It's in the hippocampus. And that has been developed now in 2005 to these things called grid cells, where they say it's not about just moving place by place in the city. It's about remembering a relationship between places. So, and when the Nobel Prize winners, was this team of people, and this one guy from the 70s and these two people from the early 2000s, they won the prize together. And the press described it as our inner GPS. So for me, as someone who was one of the first artists using GPS to talk about uncertainties of movement in the city and of spatial references and the discontinuities of human scale and planetary scale and all of those interesting ways of walking around the city with these kinds of devices. They weren't around yet, but they created the imagination for them. Where did that land me? Yeah, so I think that's what I'm interested in, not so much the one-to-one that a brain is a metaphor of the map, but it's actually the way that the map is imprinted in our brain. That's what they've discovered is memory, is a kind of memory. And so this morning when we were talking all about social media, the ways that we can archive all of it's not, you're actually not creating memory in social media. It's really difficult to archive social media. In fact, it's almost impossible. The Library of Congress have just, said that they were going to archive Twitter. And the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger for them to solve. So the memory of social media might be the objects and the chips that are polluting, polluting the planet. But the content we might not remember. So,
but the narratives could be remembered in a way, no?
Because, in a different, and they get passed on like stories get passed on now, right, through imprint in the brain.
Or even like the idea, no? Just like to have like a narrative that it is going just like to last for 2 seconds and then it's going to disappear.
And then it's going to disappear. Yeah, but it might not. It gets remembered. It's remembered.
In the
that's
brain.
The mystery. Again, the mystery of a brain. It's imprinted somewhere. And it's imprinted a lot of places. So it's imprinted in the place cells and grid cells in your brain. It's imprinted ecologically in places on Earth, right? But it's not this one-to-one. The metaphor of the brain is the metaphor of urbanism and,
Okay, so interscalarity, maps, connections and disconnections. Many, many thanks, Laura.
Yeah, thank you. And also, one more thing.
One more thing.
Big team of people helped make my exhibit, and I have an incredible group of people at the Center for Spatial Research, and Johan Hartmann did those amazing animations of the neurons, and many other people were involved in all parts of both projects. Okay, thanks.